Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices is made possible in part by Allstate, the Searle Funds at the Chicago Community Trust, and CIBC.
Good evening y bienvenidos to Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices. I'm Araceli Gomez Saldana, host and reporter with WBEZ. Thank you for sharing part of your weekend with us. On the show tonight, for the first time, we're going back-to-back with Chicago Tonight Black Voices. And with the unveiling of the Mayor Lightfoot's budget plan, there's a lot to talk about, so we'll have a crossover discussion with Black and Latino journalists to break down the proposal. A new study finds that extreme heat could threaten nearly $2 billion a year in earnings for outdoor workers in Illinois. We'll hear more about the impact of these increasing temperatures and working conditions. The Puerto Rican Festival has returned to Humboldt Park, and we'll hear what's on the Cultural Celebrations playlist for the weekend.
There's something to the power of music in this play, and I think maybe in the world.
And a preview of the Goodman Theater's American Mariachi. First off tonight, Mayor Lori Lightfoot has unveiled her budget plan for 2022, a plan that one alderman called a Christmas list of progressive spending items. The proposed budget uses federal relief funds to pilot a $31 million universal basic income plan for 5,000 low-income families, add $52 million for mental health initiatives, put $240 million more into affordable housing initiatives, give all 50 alderman people $100,000 to distribute as microgrants in their communities. The plan also adds $189 million to the Chicago Police Department's budget for a total near $2 billion. Joining us now to break it all down are four reporters. Carlos Ballesteros with Injustice Watch, Adam Rhodes with the Chicago Reader, Brandon Pope with CW26, and Jamie Nesbitt Golden with Block Club Chicago. Adam, we'll start with you. Members of the City Council's Progressive Caucus said it seemed like the proposed budget was pulled from their wish list. Overall, what do you think it indicates about a Lightfoot's administration priorities in 2022?
I think the Lightfoot administration, number one, is definitely concerned, I think, with how the city has been received during the pandemic. I think there's been a lot of concerns that the city could be doing more, that the city has been sitting on COVID relief dollars. So I think admittedly this budget with the amount of social programs it has within it, I think is probably a response to that.
Jamie, the $240 million were added for affordable housing. Do we have an idea of what approach the city will take in adding this housing? And what is the community reaction? What are you hearing?
So I'm not quite sure because when I cover affordable housing stories, I really don't hear much about the CHA. It's usually in relation to a private developer coming into the community and offering to, sort of build luxury homes and set aside a certain percentage towards affordable housing. But so I'm not really certain how this is going to play out. I know the CHA had some bad press a few years ago for literally sitting on millions of dollars while, properties were sort of falling away. So it'd be really interesting to see what Lightfoot does with that. But when I talk to the residents, it's a very sort of NIMBY attitude. They're worried about affordable housing bringing in certain folks that might not, respect the community, which is a really awkward, weird conversation, but this is how they feel. And, a lot of conversation on the South Side mirrors that up north, so.
We'll have to wait and see, of course. And the budget also adds $52 million to fund mental health initiatives. But Nestor Flores of the Pilsen Wellness Center says before the city starts spending more money, it needs to evaluate how it's spending the money that is already there.
Is it effective? What does the data show? Does the actual members of the community, do they know about these programs? Are they participating in these programs? We need to hear their voice. So, you're asking me, and I appreciate you asking me, but I would also ask the community, like, hey, have you heard of these funds being allocated in the budget, and how does it serve you? And I guarantee you're going to get different responses, and some people almost perhaps even shrugging their shoulders and being like, well, that doesn't really serve me, or I've never, in my experience, it hasn't. And that, again, that's where the gap is, I feel.
So again, that's Nestor Flores. Brandon, when it comes to funding mental health initiatives, what are you hearing? What are communities asking for from the administration?
Well, the big ask for most of these communities is to restore the mental health clinics that were shut down years ago under Rahm Emanuel's administration. We're seeing added dollars in the budget toward a vague mental health services, but without seeing that reopening of clinics, many see that as kind of like a black hole kind of thing going on there, because it's no coincidence the neighborhoods where the most violence are, that's where these mental health clinics were taken away from. Instead, you've seen dollars shifted, more money funded towards policing. Again, another budget with a policing increase, and that's not at all what citizens are asking for. Public safety obviously is important, but trends have shown that increasing police budgets doesn't lead to better public safety at all. So why not distribute that money to other things like mental health? That's what residents are calling for right now. This budget doesn't quite strike that tone.
Carlos, I'll go to you. We have a lot to get through with this budget. $1.3 billion of the federal stimulus funds cover the cost of running the city during the pandemic and make up for lost revenue. Is the portion for social programs the right balance?
I don't know. The thing is, to Brandon's point, the largest increase, I think, in the budget was to police. And, today, Budget Director Susie Park told the city council, that that chunk of money that increased for the police budget comes from the new contract they just signed with the Fraternal Order of Police that gives thousands of officers retroactive police pay raises back to 2017. And so, is it the right size for the social programs? It's hard to tell. I think especially with the violence prevention programs, the mayor is touting that in this budget, it's increased to by $85 million, puts us at the same levels of funding these kinds of programs as New York and Los Angeles, respective to our populations. But the thing is, I think the jury is still out on whether or not these programs are very effective. There's a lot of academic research that shows that a lot of these violence prevention programs have a mixed bag of results. So it's very tough to say. It's very easy to say, look, we're funding a lot of stuff, we're funding these programs, but it's a lot harder to see if the impact that they're having. So time will tell, I suppose.
If I could jump in here, it's very interesting looking at this budget because it seems like Lightfoot is trying to strike two tones here. She's trying to strike a community's first tone, but also a policing, public safety, tough on crime tone. And it's hard to make those things work in lockstep. You can't now automatically please both. But I will say this budget does mirror more so what many expected out of her when she was running for mayor, a lot more progressive causes. So it's just going to be interesting to see how that exactly plays out if it gets passed.
And another thing that Mayor Lori Lightfoot is changing a bit on, a rhetorical change, I would say, from Mayor Lori Lightfoot, going from campaigning on removing aldermanic privilege to offering alder people a fund of $100,000 each to do with as they will. Do you think these funds can create real change? And is there any indication of oversight or limits? What are we hearing, Jamie?
Well, I'm not really sure if there is any type of oversight, but I do think that this is her trying to make nice with a very contentious city council, which is good for her. But I think also sort of making it sort of equal across the board, stops, it sort of halts any criticism about her, trying to, favor one particular, community over another. And I think that, $100,000 can go a long way in, say, Roseland or Auburn Gresham or Inglewood, as opposed to Lincoln Park. That said, these places definitely need, investment, and that money, helps with, school supplies and community, block club parties and the like. So I think it's definitely a good thing. But I'm not really sure if this is going to be enough to get on their good side. So I think time will tell.
Brandon, the budget proposes a relatively modest property tax increase, but there is an increased reliance on finances and fees collection like speeding tickets. Do you see any speed bumps in that portion of the plan?
Nice choice of words there. You know, what's interesting about that, it's a progressive policy that I think works in theory, but once you actually dig into the details, I want to see how it plays out. Are we going to start looking into people's incomes? Then you got some privacy concerns that come up with that one. But I think many can agree, if you're going 6 or 7 miles over the speed limit, it shouldn't put you in debt. It shouldn't straddle you or hurt you too much. There are some fines out there and fees that probably do need to have the same penalty, like driving recklessly in a construction zone. But if we can have some grace towards people, I think it goes a long way. So that right there is a nice progressive policy you're going to see a lot of people get behind because it does help a lot of people.
Carlos, is there anything you would like to ask quickly before we wrap up?
I would just like to say, re-election season is not too far away, and this budget kind of like takes us to the mayor's last year into her first term. And so I think reading this, and also I think, it's a one-time opportunity with this boatload of federal money that we got through the COVID package. So it'll be interesting to see how these programs are elevated next year.
Of course. Our thanks to Carlos Ballesteros, Adam Rhodes, Brandon Pope, and Jamie Nesbitt Golden. Up next, working outdoors amid extreme heat. What protections do workers have? That and much more ahead. Temperatures have been reaching record-breaking levels across the country, affecting working conditions for farmers, those in construction, and even delivery workers. The Biden administration recently launched a plan with the Occupational Safety and Health Administration to protect workers and communities from extreme heat. According to the White House, OSHA will develop a workplace heat standard. Joining us to discuss how rising temperatures are impacting the lives of outdoor workers and more are Rigoberto Campos, day labor organizer at the Latino Union of Chicago, and Dr. Christina Dahl, senior climate scientist for the Climate and Energy Program at the Union of Concerned Scientists. Christina, we'll start with you. You co-authored a study that draws attention to extreme heat affecting U.S. outdoor workers. What does the research say about hazardous heat conditions, and are these conditionings worsening in our area?
Sure. So we had done some research a couple of years ago that found that the frequency and the severity of extreme heat are poised to increase really dramatically between now and the middle of the century with continued climate change. We know that outdoor workers are among the people in our society who are the most exposed to extreme heat. So we wanted to understand how climate change could affect the livelihoods of outdoor workers in the future. What we found was really surprising. We found that between now and the middle of the century, outdoor workers could lose $55 billion per year on average because of lost work time due to extreme heat.
And Rigoberto, who do you see being most at risk when it comes to working outside in the extreme heat? I mean, Dr. Christina Dahl just explained some of the conditions that her research found.
Yeah, I would definitely put day laborers in that category. I think pretty much anyone also working in the Southwest or in any other coastal states. But the reality is that day laborers go through conditions where on the one hand, you're going through extreme heat conditions when you're at work and sometimes at the abuse of an employer. But you also go to that sometimes if you don't have cooling systems at home. And so you're kind of going through both those conditions in your own habitat and in the workplace.
So no relief there. That's concerning. Christina, part of your study states that outdoor workers in Illinois are projected to face nearly $1.9 billion, you mentioned, in annual earnings, and that's at risk due to extreme heat. Cook, Will, and DuPage counties being hit the hardest. Why is that?
Yeah, so when we look at where outdoor work is happening across the United States, we see a couple patterns. And one is that when you have an urban area like Chicago, you tend to have a lot more people living there. And so you have a high number relatively of people working outdoors. But if you look at more rural areas, you have a greater percentage of the population working outdoors. And that means that outdoor work is constituting a greater proportion of that area's economy. So in terms of the number of people exposed to extreme heat, we will see more people exposed to extreme heat in urban areas. But when we look at the impacts of extreme heat on a local economy, it's really those more rural areas where you have a greater proportion of people working outdoors where we see some of the greatest risks.
Interesting. Earlier, we spoke with Esperanza Gonzalez from the Illinois Migrant Council, who works and trains farm workers in the field on heat prevention safety. Take a listen.
They need to take breaks. They need to drink plenty of water. They need to know the symptoms of heat stress, heat stroke. They need to know what to do. They need to have somebody there with a phone to call 911 if they need to. They need to drink plenty of water. They need to keep hydrated at all times. So it's been a challenge, though, let me tell you, because a lot of people don't know that the harms that heat can do to them. They don't know that heat can kill them.
So, Rigoberto, we're hearing these conditions. When it comes to improving some of these working conditions and creating awareness, what are some of the biggest challenges that you've seen?
Yeah, honestly, it's definitely getting day laborers access to the information. I think oftentimes they do have their own channels through which they get information, and we engage them in that regard, but access is definitely one of them. I think definitely kind of having those relationships with community healthcare clinics that can kind of facilitate not just the access part, but the awareness around what could happen if you're not taking care of yourself on the job or in general. I think it's also one of those things, and we have conversations along those lines. But generally speaking, challenges I think also come down to the fact that sometimes we need workers to kind of voice what's going on the job, and so that we know how to appropriately answer. And sometimes they're scared to kind of bring those comments up because fear of retribution.
And Cristina, what do you think? What do you see as hurdles to creating better working conditions for these workers?
So the things that workers need when it comes to extreme heat are really fairly simple. It's water, shade, and rest. And with those three things, we can prevent the majority of heat-related illnesses and deaths in our country. I live in California, where we've had a heat health standard for outdoor workers for several years now. And when that standard was being developed, there was a lot of opposition from employers who thought that providing this water and the rest time and the breaks that their employees need would be really costly. But what we're seeing now, with that policy has been in place for a while, is that while it's not being perfectly enforced, we are seeing a decrease in the number of heat-related illnesses on the job. So that's encouraging, and that's happening at a much lower expense than employers anticipated. So we do expect that as the Biden administration and OSHA are trying to create this heat health standard that would apply nationally, it's likely that there will be pushback from employers, but we can look to places like California that have had a standard in place and see the very clear benefits that have resulted from that standard.
Rigoberto, what protections or standards would you like to see in places either by employers or by the Biden administration, as Cristina has mentioned?
Well, as I reviewed the proposal, I think in practice, I think it's a good step. In terms of what we know the conditions are on the ground, I think for workers to feel the effects and have confidence in the proposal, should it be practiced, I think the reality is that it's enforcement and consistency. Workers often feel like they're not supported, and that's typically where we step in. But we also kind of rely on the law and the enforcement of a lot of OSHA and a lot of the fair labor standards that day laborers are able to utilize to push back.
Yes, thank you so much. Our thanks to Rigoberto Campos and Cristina Dahl for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Up next, the Puerto Rican Festival returns to Humboldt Park. Stay with us for more. After taking a year and a half off due to the pandemic, the Puerto Rican Festival is back for its 39th year in Humboldt Park. The event's organizers say attendees can expect more arts and culture representation than ever before, but the heart of the celebration is still for the music from La Isla del Encanto.
This weekend, you can expect music. We are going to have Charlie Cruz and Michael Stewart closing out Saturday night. And then Sunday, it is going to be Frankie Negron and Pete Perignon. But it's also important to really highlight the other facets of our culture, which is the arts. So this is not your typical Puerto Rican festival. It's the New Fest, which is showing a more well-rounded view of who we are as a people, as opposed to just music and party. We're more than that. And so we hope that you come out to see what we've got going on.
The Puerto Rican Festival runs through Sunday night in Humboldt Park. You can find more details on our website. It was just before opening night that the cast of American Mariachi had to close its doors. But now, nearly 18 months later, that cast has returned. The show is a co-production between the Dallas Theater Center and Chicago's Goodman Theater. Artist correspondent Angel Idu takes us behind the scenes of this new production set in Chicago in the 1970s.
Music is so powerful, right? I think that's the first thing. There's a line in the show that music is memory.
That's essentially the premise of the new Goodman Theater production, American Mariachi. After playing a familiar tune for her mother with dementia and sparking her memory, Lucha, played by Tiffany Solano, decides to do the unthinkable and start an all-female mariachi band. The ensemble features current and former musicians from Chicago group Sones de Mexico, who says this fictional female group fully captures the music genre.
Mariachi is a whole culture in itself. There's son, we have rancheras, boleros, polkas.
Itself, it's a small orchestra that can represent any kind of music.
Going up against the patriarchs of their family, the story also explores themes within gender roles, something actress Lucy Godinez has experienced while working with her dad, who is also director of the play.
My dad directing the show, machismo definitely comes up, and if we're ever like arguing, I'll be like, machismo right there. You know, we talk about it all the time, and there it is right there. He'd be like, no, it's not. How could it be? And I'm like, well, you're a Latino man. Your inherent existence contributes to machismo. And I'm like, it's an ongoing thing where like things in the show kind of inform like the dialogues that like we have just with our own families about these exact same things, because they're very real.
The story also sparks conversations around mental health and the role music plays in helping people heal.
In particular, our community, to think about mental illness in a way that is not something to be ashamed of or to have to hide or something negative, because I think one of the interesting things about this play is that it makes you wonder what we call mental illness maybe is just another reality for someone else.
But that's not the only takeaway from this production.
Now, as Latina woman, what does it mean to bring the story of American Mariachi to the Goodman Theater?
You can't be what you can't see. And there are so many different amazing Spanish-speaking communities in the city of Chicago. Those folks should be able to feel like they deserve to have like world-class theater about them and about their families and about their stories, partially in the languages that they may speak in their own home, that they're deserving of that kind of theater and art in their own city.
I'm really excited for audiences of all ethnicities to be able to come and see it, because I feel like they're going to understand this story. They're going to understand the importance of family and music and tradition, but for them to get to see what it looks like in my household or, you know, in another Latinx household.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Angel Ito.
American Mariachi runs through October 24th at the Goodman Theater. It's just one of 6 productions in this year's Chicago International Latino Theater Festival, Destinos. We've got more information about the festival and American Mariachi on our website. And that's our show for this weekend. Be sure to check out our website, WTTW.com/news, for the very latest from WTTW News, including the CDC endorsing COVID booster shots for millions of older Americans. And if you're watching us on Saturday night, you can also see us and Latino Voices and Black Voices on Sundays beginning at 10 p.m. And you can catch me hosting Weekend Edition Saturdays and Sundays, as well as my reporting during the week on 91.5 WBEZ. Next week on Latino Voices, Alex Hernandez with Univision will be here in the host chair. And now, from all of us here at Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices, I'm Araceli Gomez Aldana. Thank you for sharing part of your weekend with us. Stay healthy and stay safe. Buenas noches.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm dedicated to preserving the dignity and rights of all individuals.